the production's been hugely important, but massively counterintuitive, because you're not trying to make it sound like this slick, polished thing. You're trying to make it sound as if John's cobbled this thing together, but behind the scenes to us, it is slick and polished, and it's all on purpose.
Hi, my name is Dr. Hey guys, I'm John... Bugger.
What on earth are you doing?
Shut up, just let me focus, yeah?
Yes, focus, of course. Quite the Herculean task, isn't it, saying one's name?
Shh. Hi, my name is Dr. John Watson, and I'm here with my flatmate Sherlock Holmes, who is the subject matter for my podcast... What are you doing? Can you put the violin down, please? Just for a minute.
Watson, I really must be getting back to my work.
Just, please.
Your microphone is in the wrong mode.
Right. Do you know what? This is stupid. Yeah? I'll do the pre-titles myself. Okay? Get out. Out. Hi, I'm Dr. John Watson.
Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
And from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/I Hear of Sherlock. I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 275, Sherlock and Co.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Hello and welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, maybe we should call this Burt and Co.
Oh, okay, I like that. LLC? Are we going to put LLC at the end of it?
Oh, I don't want to get into any legal trouble, so yeah, probably. Let's limit our liability.
Oh, excellent. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, we have lots of liabilities here, which any listener who's a regular around here will certainly be the first to point out.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to be a gangbuster of an episode. Anytime that we can do something related to audio, obviously, it's the medium in which we work, but it is something near and dear to our hearts, and we are kind of geeks about it, and I think we geek out appropriately enough with Joel Emery here, who is the writer for Sherlock and Co. You'll be hearing more about him in just a moment. But having listened to the episodes that have already dropped from Sherlock and Co. by Goalhanger, I have to say I'm really impressed and looking forward to the whole series.
Yeah, me too. Fabulous.
Yeah. Well, the show notes for this episode, including links to any place you need to go, are available at ihose.co/ihose275. You'll want to be sure to click on the show notes, particularly on the Patreon link. If you are not already a Patreon supporter, for as little as $1 a month, you can become part of this community, and it opens up all kinds of possibilities, including, like in this episode, where we will have adjunct content. We will have additional content for you to listen to as the conversation with our guest keeps going. We go behind the scenes with him. We talk about the music. We talk about other inspirations that he's had. We talk about sound design. Lots of different aspects with, I think, another 20 to 30 minutes of the conversation. And this is already a long episode. So that will be available exclusively to our Patreon supporters. So make sure you go to patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock and join. As little as $1 a month, up to $20 a month if you would so care to do that. Up to you how you'd like to support the show, but we have all kinds of thank you gifts for you at various levels. Now, you remember the last time we were here, we talked with Andrew Lysette, author of The Worlds of Sherlock Holmes. People have gone out and have bought the book. We've heard lots of great things from our listeners and other people in the Sherlockian community about it. So it's wonderful to hear that our good taste was backed up by the public. But Bert, I don't know if you recall at the beginning of that episode, you began to launch into a poem. It was an Andrew Marvell poem. The world is, what was it? The world is enough? Is that
World Enough in Time?
World Enough in Time, yes.
It's a poem. It's a poem called "To His Coy Mistress."
That's right, of course.
Had we but world enough in time, this coyness, lady, were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side should rubies find, and I by the tide of Humber would complain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, Andrew,
but the key there is, when you live through that and you get to the second verse, by my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. That's
yeah. And we were pleased to receive a bit of email back from Andrew, who remarked on the stanza there. He said, "Thanks for reminding me of the Andrew Marvell poem." And of course, Andrew was a biographer of Ian Fleming. Wanted to remind you of that. And he writes, "There are connections to the world of James Bond, whose family had the motto, 'The world is not enough.'" And in Latin, the phrase orbis non sufficit is thought to originate from Pharsalia by Lucan. It appears twice, both with uncomplimentary associations. The first reference is to a group of villainous mutineers, and the second is to the ambitious Julius Caesar. It was then applied to Alexander the Great by Juvenal in his collection of satirical poems, the Satires. "The world was not big enough for Alexander the Great, but a coffin was." Phrased as non sufficit orbis, it became the motto of the Spanish King Philip II after ascending the Portuguese throne in 1580. Best wishes, Andrew.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, I like that connection.
Well, it's fabulous. I mean, my goodness, I had no... What a motto, too. So I guess this is part of the Fleming coat of arms?
James Bond's coat of arms, yeah.
Oh, James Bond, but not Ian Fleming personally.
No. Joel Emery is the writer of Sherlock Co. and one half of Holy Smokes Audio, along with Adam Jarrell. Joel has written a bunch of critically acclaimed award-winning shows with downloads in the millions. The Offensive, about a fictional Premier League football team that ran for 5 years with over 180 episodes. Boom, an audio drama set at Enron in 1999. Jackie the Ripper, a comedy retelling of the Whitechapel murders with a female killer and male victims. And now, he and his co-creator, director, and editor Adam Jarrell have teamed with Britain's largest podcast network, Goalhanger, as a collaboration designed for one purpose and one purpose alone: to bring all 60 Sherlock Holmes stories back into the limelight for modern audiences. Sherlock & Co. is a weekly scripted audio drama/comedy that will depict every adventure from the perspective of first-time podcaster John H. Watson. Starting with the illustrious client, this audio journey is expected to last years and attract eventual download figures in the millions. Joel Emery, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you for having me.
Well, before we dive into what is a very exciting topic for us, for we audio geeks, let's begin at the beginning, shall we? Where and when did you first meet Sherlock Holmes?
I would say I'm from South Devon, so Dartmoor is right there, very looming presence. And originally it came from my dad just being a pain in the arse and scaring his children about the Hound of the Baskervilles, and I didn't really know what that meant. And he'd do the same when we went to Bodmin, which is in Cornwall, and we'll talk about the Beast of Bodmin more. And it wasn't until probably 11 or 12 when I sort of heard Hound of the Baskervilles again, in its context of Sherlock Holmes, and I thought, oh, that's what he was talking about. But as a whippersnapper at 34 years of age, I would probably say the Guy Ritchie movies and the BBC's adaptation of Sherlock is where I was first drawn to the characters. I was going to say the stories, but I suppose they're not really, are they? But I was drawn to the characters there. And then essentially I really properly fell head over heels for those two when I was asked to do Sherlock & Co. essentially a couple of years ago, 2 years ago now, yeah.
Interesting. So what else? That's a big gap, from your father scaring you about the Hound of the Baskervilles, and then, the introduction with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman. What characterized your life in that interval? What other characters and stories were you caught up in? What's the nickel summary here for you?
I suppose I went off with things like Lord of the Rings, really. I liked otherworldly stuff most of the time. And then obviously, 14, 15, you turn into a bit of a brat and you don't read anything. And yeah, I just didn't... It struck me as one of those things where I was so aware of the characters, I'd almost felt like I'd read the works, which was, completely untrue and a little bit deluded. But I guess I was in Middle Earth, to be honest, in terms of what I liked in literature. And yeah, sorry to go straight into the origin story of my show, if that's all right, but this makes more sense. 2 years ago, Tony Pastor from Goalhanger, which is the company that produced Sherlock and Co. He had said to me, he's a massive, massive Sherlock fan, and I met him I had a meeting with him, and he said, I want you to do this show, because I'd written a few other things. I want you to write this show, and it'll be John will be a true crime podcaster. And it will be all the Sherlock Holmes stories. And this is how far removed I was from the work. I didn't really know what he was talking about. I genuinely, in my head, Sherlock Holmes was sort of 3 novels. Honestly, I didn't know there were short stories. And I kind of thought, I don't really get this guy's point, because I sort of feel like Sherlock is everywhere. I always feel like there's adaptations of Sherlock. I don't think there's a gap in the market at all here. So he gave me like this penguin, like knackered copy that he'd had since university of Sherlock Holmes stories. And he said, go and read The Red-Headed League, because I'd like to start with that one. And I went home and read it. And I physically said aloud when I finished it, oh my God, because I thought this is so... The length of the stories, how diverse they are, and how sort of they jump around different places, not just in London, but sort of all over. And they were bite sized. They were perfectly sized in what I consider kind of like the best length and best way to consume audio drama. So that 2 years ago is when I first started to truly understand the work of Arthur Conan Doyle, really. And I suppose the more you read of the short stories, coming from where I came from, the more you start to look at all the recent adaptations and sort of go, guys, what were you doing? All these stories are right here. Why are we doing all this? Like, why is Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law doing their own sort of stories and stuff like that? So it really is, in terms of actually knowing and understanding and consuming the work, it's a 2-year relationship, really, which would make me one of the youngest Sherlockians, I would imagine.
Well, you shouldn't feel awkward at all about that, because, we've been doing this podcast for such a long time. And so what we found is that there's just a timeline or a progression based on popular culture that people encounter the character. Back in the 1920s, when all there was books, people got the books. Then there was radio, and some people found Sherlock Holmes in the radio. And then you meet people who said, oh, yeah, the first thing I saw was a movie. And then you meet people who say, no, for me it was a comic book. And then you meet people who say, no, it was an animated film that I first saw. And then they say, no, I saw The Great Mouse Detective. And so here we are, and this is just the contemporary introduction.
Yeah.
And I think, what's fascinating, Joel, is you were first enamored with the characters. And it's interesting because over the course of 60 stories, Conan Doyle was able to develop this really intense friendship between these two men. And we talk about this all the time, that the canon of Sherlock Holmes stories is really a textbook of friendship. And it's spaced out over decades. So, every single short story is just a glimpse into that, but there's an arc that's happening. And if you pull back, you can see. So the fact that you were enamored with the characters first, I think it's great instinct. And then you were introduced to Conan Doyle, the storyteller, and, his ability to craft something in, one sitting, as it were, which is essentially what you do with episodic podcasts. That you only have a limited time to work with, and you have to develop the characters, develop the plot, etc. So
and it's also the kind of the sort of pressure points on the cases, on each individual case. They are so simple in order for a sort of case to either all come together or a villain's situation to all sort of fall apart. I think the one everyone's most infatuated in, obviously, is The Dog in the Night. For audio, stuff like that is an absolute dream, because I don't have to be in this situation of this guy that you heard 2 episodes ago, he was actually dating her, and then they went to this other. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not drawing in these things, because Conan Doyle was sort of, he had those devices where everything would sort of click into place, which is dream scenario for someone like me, who doesn't have to sort of keep reminding listeners over and over, because it's difficult. Audio's complicated. You don't have people's attention like you do on screens and to an extent books. So having those singular moments that can really make the penny drop is really valuable.
Yeah. And I'm interested in your craft as a writer. How did you get started writing specifically for audio?
So I worked in live TV for a while in football, soccer, and I'd had a mockumentary idea of essentially a Premier League football team, but you just saw behind the scenes of like the boardroom, the sort of upper level management, nothing to do with sort of players on the pitch, not like a sort of Ted Lasso thing, or this was 5 years ago. And despite the fact of being in TV, and I know this isn't how the world works, but no one wanted to make it. So a friend of mine was doing a podcast. He was an actor, and he was just interviewing sort of other actors, really. It was called Inside the Actors Studio Flat. And I asked him, do you think this could work as an audio, this football mockumentary? He said, yeah, we did that, and we did that for 5 years, and we essentially built up a fan base of a fictional soccer team that would, play real teams. And we were sort of top of, fiction podcasting charts in the UK. It did really good numbers. And in those 5 years, I wrote another show called Jackie the Ripper, which was
Fantastic
a retelling.
Show.
Yeah, do you like it? Thank you very much.
It's amazing, and I can actually see the breadcrumbs where that leads to where we'd like to go today with Sherlock and Co. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I should specify I'm a comedy writer. I do really try at drama. I'm not that good at it, and I always just think of a joke whilst I've got like a good flow going in a sort of dramatic scene. So Jackie the Ripper was a modern day retelling of the Jack the Ripper murders, sort of all down to the same names for investigators, victims, suspects, same dates, but we flipped the gender. So female killer, male victims, obviously because it's a comedy, and also because of the sort of, disgusting way that Jack actually dealt with his victims. Our Jackie is sort of ripping guys' balls off and chopping their penises off and stuff like that. All very highbrow stuff, as you can imagine. And then with that show, Tony at Goalhanger had listened to it, and Goalhanger in the UK, some US listeners might be aware of it, but UK listeners almost definitely will be. Goalhanger is run by a company, is run by a guy called Gary Lineker, who's an ex-soccer player. Now he's like our biggest sportscaster, I would say. And they do a lot of sort of political chat shows, historical chat shows, sort of economics, things like that. And yeah, a couple of years ago, Tony spoke to me, and obviously we'd done something where we sort of comedically retold the Jack the Ripper situation. So he, being an absolute Sherlock Holmes obsessive, wanted us to tackle Sherlock. And for me, it could only work if it was sort of hyper realistic, because I was aware that he would be serving this up to an audience that weren't used to audio drama. They were only used to people chatting in a room about any given subject. So we have really, really ramped up the realism. Paul Waggett, who plays Dr. John Watson, is miraculous in that department. But I do write very realistic style dialogue, and judging by how well it's gone down, and how fortunate we are, sort of top end of the charts here in the UK, I think we're close to kind of bridging that gap between audio drama audiences and sort of mainstream audiences that are used to sort of chat-based stuff like this.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I think you've been really successful. So now Scott and I are obviously enthusiastic about audio and enthusiastic about Sherlock Holmes. But the lovely thing, particularly when you look at the Holmes stories, and you alluded to this earlier, is that you found, in your review of the cases of Sherlock Holmes and the characters and their interactions, you found these little things that characterize all of that and translate it into this format so beautifully. So, for example, Watson, that we know, is a careless writer because he forgets things. Well, he's also a careless podcaster. He doesn't really edit. He doesn't really know how his equipment works. The meeting with Stamford at the bar. Well, poor Watson has stood up and meets an old colleague.
Excuse me, can I get a pint of...
pints, mate, bottle.
Sorry, you what?
Bottles.
Right, yeah, bottle. Bottle of the Pilsner, please, mate. If you are wondering, that is the sound of being stood up. So, yeah.
$5.90, please, mate.
Of course it is. Yeah, this is stupid. I am turning this off.
it is you. Mad!
Hiya.
John, it's me, Stamford. Stamo, how you doing?
Stamford? Jesus Christ. You look great, mate. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm alright, mate. I'm alright. Come here.
Steady. Walking wounded these days.
Oh, bloody hell, you're kidding. What happened?
I went to war, didn't I?
Ah, yeah.
And the beautiful thing is the compression. When you look at the Conan Doyle stories, Watson goes from I was an army surgeon to meeting Sherlock Holmes in a page or two. You go from, I'm in Ukraine and I'm meeting Sherlock Holmes in 4 minutes. So the translations you do are brilliant. But the reason why I give you this intro here is my real question is, which I'm really curious about. Coming into the Sherlock Holmes stories and taking it to the world of audio, what did you hate when you looked at the Sherlock Holmes stories? Because we talk to readers all the time who say, there are parts of the Conan Doyle stories where all of a sudden, you're in America and for the backstory and Holmes and Watson aren't there. And boy, all of this stuff is boring. I mean, when you looked at the canon, and began putting this together, what did your eyebrows go up on? What did you say, well, I've got to find some other way around this because this won't work?
The biggest thing I would say, having got a few adventures down on paper now, the biggest thing is I'm constantly trying to reduce the wealth of the victims and or suspects. I think late Victorian, early Edwardian audiences were obsessed with the upper classes. Some would say we're all still the same, unfortunately. But there's only so many sort of lords and sirs and rich oil tycoons and American businessmen that Sherlock, our version of Sherlock and Watson, can go and help out, really. So I suppose what I find myself doing in stories is kind of bringing those characters back down to earth economically. It's just because first of all, I don't want it to get samey in that sense, but also it wouldn't look great if they were just sort of looking out for people dwelling in mansions of and
so you don't want it to be Downton Abbey.
Exactly, yeah. I don't mean like, there's another rich bloke's got an issue, Watson, let's go. So we're doing some of that, and then of course, again, it's nothing to do with Arthur Conan Doyle. It's more a reflection of the time. Probably, I suppose they call it gender bending, don't they? I think damsels in distress. Generally, I don't think we would do that week in, week out. We'll probably mix it up.
Don't have a lot of opportunities for governesses.
No, you don't these days. So yeah, I suppose those were the two things. Naturally, because of where we felt we were relevant was retelling the short stories. Of course, we will tackle the novels, and I don't think this is a spoiler necessarily, but obviously you two will know. We deliberately skip over A Study in Scarlet, half as a little joke, but then half because BBC did it very well. We don't necessarily want our listeners to sort of sit through 5 or 6 parts of something. We want to jump into something quite zippy right from the off. But also, yeah, like I said, we wanted to show why we think we're relevant, which is the short stories. So yeah, I know the novels is they're sort of, they disappear off to America for a few chapters and all that kind of thing. But at the forefront of my mind was those short stories. And I think when you do blitz through them of an evening, you do a few evenings in a row of reading them and over and over and over. And obviously I'm digesting them in a way which Arthur Conan Doyle did not intend. They can feel a bit sort of wealth obsessed, and women can kind of be stuck and need fixing or helping and all that kind of thing, which is fine. But I suppose I probably couldn't do it week in, week out.
Well, it's a cultural mismatch for the current audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, these stories were, very much a product of their time. And
of course.
I think what you're producing here is very much a product of its time. And the fact that it's an audio drama, that it's present day. Obviously, there will be comparisons made between this and the BBC Sherlock, and I can't imagine that wasn't intentional on your part anyway. But it is not Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes placed in audio. It is very much a Sherlock written from your head, from your pen, for this particular production. Talk a little bit about how your Sherlock Holmes is characterized in this drama.
So our Sherlock Holmes, we were aware of what, because we've worked with Paul, who plays John Watson. We've worked with him so much. We were aware of what a kind of naturalistic counterweight he would be. So we knew what we wanted out of John. We wanted him to sort of be a very comforting, nourishing, very real sounding, British guy to kind of listen to. And we felt that once we got that right, we could juxtapose with somebody that felt like Sherlock from, I suppose I could say from the books, but almost from another age. I think the BBC put a lot of effort into making their Sherlock Holmes, their Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes, make him sort of feel modern, whereas ours, he's almost feels a little bit of an anachronism in the sense that, he's, I would say he's sort of exceptionally well spoken. I do lift dialogue and quotes right from the book. I barely change a word sometimes for the things coming out of Sherlock's mouth. And the only other thing we've done is we've just made him a little bit more aloof, I would say, from the source material. And we've kind of, again, as that counterweight, he's a little bit sour, or a little bit distant at the start. He's kind of sort of in his own world a little bit, which allows Watson to kind of fill the dead air, as it were, with his kind of chatter. So yeah, I think our Sherlock Holmes definitely feels unique, and I hope Sherlockians will kind of see how he feels a bit more of a classical Holmes, in a certain sense. I don't know if you guys agree.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I think
so.
I think it's really successful. From the first moment that he speaks, in your translation of what in Study in Scarlet was in the laboratory discovering a blood test, to this other, but perfectly relevant medical expertise in exactly what he's doing. I don't want to give any spoilers for it, but I think it's a magnificent placement of the character, the situation, the attitude, the knowledge, the immediacy of his deductions into, 2020, whatever year this is, 2025, 2024.
Wherever we are.
Yeah, no, I think it's fabulous, really. Well done.
You're the second person that said that to me today.
Who was the first?
Sherlock Holmes! Oh my God, what is he doing?
Stamo, why is he on a treadmill covered in blood?
Sherlock Holmes, John Watson, Sherlock Holmes.
Hiya, mate. You okay? You're bleeding. Do you want to slow down?
I can't live with him. He's a criminal.
Sorry?
Fighting or assisting those in Ukraine amount to offences under UK legislation.
Stamo, did you,
I'm gonna shoot off.
Did you message him?
Bloody great to see you, John. It's been too long, mate. I'll see you soon, alright? And Sherlock?
Mm-hmm.
Nice to see you. Bye, lads.
Stamo, do you want to maybe examine him or something?
I'll see you later.
Stamo! Hello! So I don't know what Stamford, Stamo, I used to call him Stamo. It's a stupid university thing. Yeah, I don't know what you sent on about me, but, yeah, I'm John, I'm a doctor.
Yes, you said shortly after I had observed it myself. An average doctor and an average military man. Didn't even complete a medical training upon arrival at Sandhurst, and yet you chalked up 3 tours of Afghanistan. I wouldn't brag too strongly about the doctor credentials, and evidently the military credentials leave a lot to be desired.
What did you just say?
Feel free to have a listen again when you upload your audio tonight. Not that you have any idea how that mic works. You don't want to use an omnidirectional mic for interviews, Dr. Watson. Perhaps you should think less about saving money and more about better microphones with varying modes, such as cardioid, bidirectional, and stereo. Hold this.
Hold what? What the hell is that?
What were your comedy inspirations? When you mentioned that you've done so much in writing comedy. I'm just curious as to what was relevant to you. I mean, were the Goons and Tony Hancock and Harry Enfield, or exactly? Because my view, of course, is of a prior generations of stuff.
Yeah, I realise that I haven't properly necessarily painted the picture that our show, it's not a farce by any means, but we do lean into comedy. And yeah, I suppose I remember the Goon Show. My granny used to play the Goon Show in the car all the time. And obviously I'm one of 3 boys, so we were giddy and loved it. Harry Enfield, yeah. I'm a big fan of sort of Hot Shots, Airplane. And then I suppose we like sort of more down-to-earth things like Spaced by Simon Pegg and Jessica Hines, and then The Office with Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, again sort of naturalism, probably at its best. Most things that Steve Coogan does, I think Alan Partridge is again another sort of display of a character that just seems so authentic that you almost feel like you've met him. And then going to more modern day, I'd say Jesse Armstrong, who's gone on to do Succession. He's started on another show called Peep Show, and he did some of the thick of it with Armando Iannucci. And kind of people like that, really. I like writing sort of stressful scenarios. I like characters to be stressed. I think there's a lot of humour in it, not when you're experiencing it necessarily. And I think Sherlock's story's kind of great for that, because you're whisked off on another drama almost right away, and sort of gallivanting around London. And I think when you've got a storyteller like Watson, and it's great, by the way, that we get to have Watson as the narrator essentially, it's just he's immediately thrown into that sort of fish out of water stressful scenario. He's not a goofball necessarily, but we do make him I always try and think, like, how would a normal person behave in this scenario? Now, I know that Watson's been in the army, but ultimately I can't have him too sort of rugged and with a steely resolve. Otherwise, we don't really have much dramatic tension from our protagonist. So yeah, I suppose that's where the kind of the comedy comes from. And like I say, I mean, when Goalhanger first kind of put this to us, could we make this? I remember I said to Tony, because to be honest, I was just looking forward to getting a couple $100 because I didn't have any money at the time, and he was going to pay me £200 a script. So I was sort of rubbing my hands together, and I remember saying to him, "Do you want it to be funny? Yeah, do you want it to be a comedy?" And he went, Maybe a couple of laughs per episode. And I thought, oh, damn it, because I'm not very good. I'm not very good at just writing drama, because I can never really tell if it's good. Whereas when something makes you smile when you're writing it, you sort of know that a joke is good. Whereas never really had that with drama. And then by the time that we were sat back in the office with Goalhanger, a few months later, and we'd got a few episodes recorded, they sort of forgave us for the comedic tone, and for its lightheartedness generally, really. So yeah, I can't escape comedy. And sorry to just go on to another point here, because this is not your question at all. I did find, I did find that there was a huge release in not building a grand story arc over hundreds of episodes, because obviously if we do all 56 short stories in the novels, we will get into the hundreds of episodes. And I'm sort of glad that in order to properly encapsulate the original work, yes, there's a story arc there, but it's mostly in kind of, like you say earlier, friendship, subtle character development. It's quite a shallow arc, really. It's, men growing up a little bit is in there. And I was not looking forward to, if you'd asked me to do what the BBC did, where sort of Moriarty's always there pulling the strings, and then, your events of your childhood come back to haunt the character, I would have been a bit intimidated by that, to be honest, because the idea that I'm going to pull out this big, dramatic, dark story that goes over hundreds of episodes, which, to be honest, gives me anxiety thinking about it. Whereas just the release of, of course there'll be something going on in the background, but very light, very much sort of like growth in their relationship, closeness with, our version of Mrs. Hudson, Mariana, and then just living in the moment in these adventures, how they were at the time, told by Watson, is just is exactly what we were kind of looking for, really.
Well, and really, when you think about it, this is exactly how Conan Doyle approached it at the time. He didn't know he was setting out to create 60 stories.
Yeah.
He created them, 1, 2, maybe a dozen at a time at the most. When his contract was up, he wanted to wash his hands of it, and that was it. And he kept getting pulled back in by the money. Something you should keep in mind, Joel.
Yeah.
But I think what you've managed to give us is Watson as an everyman, which is exactly what he was, right? He was an army doctor, not an infantryman. He is thrust into this situation. I think your read of the situation of stress-induced comedy or lightness from time to time, this is exactly what humans do. And in your Watson, in Paul Waggart, and I note that he played Freddie Aberline, the lead.
He did, yeah.
In Jackie the Ripper. There's this same kind of, stressful, pressurized situation of someone in a situation in which he's never been before, trying to make sense of things and interacting with people along the way. And it's just so marvelously realistic.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's the higher praise we can get when someone basically says what we've been saying for the past 2 years of this is what we want. Someone said to me the other day, they said it must feel great that people are consuming this in the same way they consumed the original works. And I sort of waffled on about the short stories, and he was like, no, because I've been listening to it on my commute, and he was talking about obviously the days when you'd sort of run and grab the Strand magazine and jump on your train, back home out into the countryside or whatever. And that's the only time it sort of dawned on me that we're sort of like a commute companion as well for people. Let's give us sort of comforting thought as well, because we're aware of the market that we sit in, which is either celebrities chatting about nothing, or experts chatting about sort of maybe the bleaker things in the world and politics and money and stuff like that. So the idea that we can be this sort of fun escape for half an hour on people's commutes, it feels great.
Yeah. Well, to your point about the frame, the market that you're in, and a wonderful thing that I think is worth calling out about Sherlock & Co. is the frame. And the frame that you've chosen is true crime podcasting. And this is so great because it's another, I think, for two reasons. One is that it's a component of realism that really enhances the believability of everything. I mean, you really do, as you listen to the episode, it just becomes all tremendously even more realistic because of the frame. But also, this frame of true crime podcasting has very real effects. In today's society, you can solve. People have solved cold cases. They have reversed people who've been wrongly convicted. So talk a little bit about that decision and how you look at this sort of true crime framework.
Yeah, so that was one of the early briefs from Goalhanger. It was basically their log line kind of thing was, we want you to come up with something that is John Watson is a true crime podcaster. And at the time, that wasn't that appealing because all I could hear was lots of narration. I could hear sort of interviews and, I don't know, stock footage and radio pieces and stuff like that true crime podcasters do. They kind of like assemble all those pieces together when they're talking about particular cases. And it was probably, the second or third time that I had reread some of the short stories when I was like, I know that Watson is being reflective, but you do really feel like you're there alongside him in any given adventure. So that's when I sort of brought into the idea that Watson has got that microphone with him and you're getting scooped up in the moment and he's not sort of comfortably reflecting and analysing various pieces. You're along for the adventure. The other thing that Tony Passer of Goalhanger thought about having was that, we go and interview real people, right? So we'll go into a tobacconist and he can talk us through these different types of tobacco and where they're from, and then that will relate to the case that they're working on. A lovely idea, but never in a million years is that going to happen. They'd never say the things you want them to say. Your audio would be all over the place because you're trying to get in a sort of natural environment. So we kind of honed it back to this realism, basically, of how real can you make the illustrious client sound? Like, what is the absolute reality of that for somebody that's just jumped into it like John Watson?
Are you finished?
Yeah. Any good?
No.
Okay.
This is the Swiss Alps, specifically the Splugen Pass. This woman is in her mid-30s. She's Austrian, could be Swiss, but probably Austrian. She's married. She has blonde hair.
Well, I said blonde hair.
But it's not natural blonde.
Oh.
She may be lying in the snow with her skis, but this is not a skiing accident. This is a murder. She died on her feet and was moved here, hence the level of decomposition.
Stood up?
Correct.
How do you know that?
Look at her chin, Watson.
Saliva?
Yes, saliva, but it's dripped out of her mouth and down under her chin. Her body is lying on the slope headfirst at, I'd say, an 8-degree angle, wouldn't you?
Yeah, sure, why not?
So our corpse is sloping ever so slightly backwards. So are we suggesting her saliva somehow defied gravity, Watson? We are certainly not. She was murdered while she was stood up.
I should say we're picking the order of the adventures. So we've started with the illustrious client. And yeah, we did look at true crime models and how people do it. And I suppose ultimately, just before we really got the final drafts down, we took a little bit of a step back and made it a bit more of a buddy movie element, but just try to ramp up realism as much as possible. I actually was reading something a couple of months ago. There's an author over here called Richard Osman. I'm sure his work's made it out there. And he's been extremely successful. And in this article, I don't know whether they coined the term in the article or it's a term that's been coined recently. They used this phrase, cozy crime. I don't know if you two have heard of this. And cozy crime is basically, yeah, it's a crime and everything, but you're not diving into the dark stuff and, getting stuck into the post-mortems and the sort of, psychological abuse and blah, blah, blah. You've got light, fun characters in moments that are, full of crime and drama, and you sort of walk that balance and you actually get something out. The end product is quite this sort of, fun, nourishing listen. And it's only now that I sort of realised we've sort of landed as that craze, if you can call it that, has just kind of taken off here in the UK. I dare say it might do in the US as well, already has, of that kind of cozy crime of, you know, yeah, people do want the gritty stuff, but you can have this kind of balance where you bring in other elements as well. So yeah, we're kind of in those two worlds of true crime and cozy crime, I'd say.
Well, and I think that works extraordinarily well because, let's face it, not every Sherlock Holmes story contained a crime. In some cases, he was just trying to clear up something that was confusing to a client, or, you know, find something that was missing. So there's not always a crime and victim, you know, that kind of formula that we see.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think this is a spoiler by any means, but our next adventure is The Noble Bachelor, and it comes from that similar kind of story of, it's not quite a crime. It's not right. It's a bit off. Something needs solving. There's a bit of panic, and Sherlock's the guy to do it. So we wanted to illustrate that exact point fairly early on. I think if we jumped in with 5 murders back to back, and then try to sort of bring in, you know, the more sort of problem-solving stuff, you probably would have cultivated the wrong kind of audience. So we're kind of bouncing around all the different types of stories that Conan Doyle comes up with, and they're so different. They are so different. And we're, you know, if you're audio drama fans, we are so lucky to be doing it in audio, because you can just sort of say, oh, we're in Dartmoor now. Whereas, you know, a TV show or a movie has to, you know, send 17 trucks down the motorway with, you know, go and find some local accommodation for all their cast and crew, and, you know, try and reach the middle of Dartmoor with all their kit. We just say it. And we're there, and the listener goes, okay, yeah, we're in Dartmoor. And then we have considered, I don't know, you know, we might look back at what I say in a year's time and go, I know we never did that. I've always sort of looked at it and thought, you know, could you set the Greek interpreter, could you set that in Greece? Again, you probably wouldn't do it if you were a TV show, because it's a lot of work, but I sort of love to hear our characters on a plane and on a little sort of half holiday, half business trip. So we're sort of considering stuff like that as well. I think because we've skipped over a study in Scarlet, for example, we've obviously got to do it because we said we're going to do every single story. So when we do eventually visit it, it's another one where I think, well, now I have to make it quite different from what they experienced at the end of episode 1, early episode 2. So, you know, is that a chance for where some of their adventure is in the US? So yeah, we're kind of looking at things like that as well.
Well, don't come to Utah.
That's
good idea to miss study in Scarlet. But, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, you just alluded to it, you know, the value of doing this in audio and being able to set the place and so on. Because this is really a wonderful collaboration. You've created the characters, you thoughtfully looked at the story, you've got great dialogue. But now you've got the casting and the sound design and the editing and the pace and the places. You know, the places become characters, and you've got music, and you've got, you know, the pace of it. Talk a little bit about the production, you know, the big journey from, okay, the script is done and now we need to produce it.
Yeah, so we're fortunate. So we've obviously, I'm the writer. Adam Jarrell is my best friend and the director. So we talk daily about the show, various ideas, things that aren't working, things that are working. So we'll kind of chat about a script once it's been done and what kind of voices we want to be casted in it. Remarkably, Paul Waggett, who plays John, and Harry Atwell, who plays Sherlock, they record remotely in their own houses. Paul actually lives in New Zealand, and I'm not going to fly him over for each adventure. So they record remotely, and they're very, very good at what they do. And obviously we get that audio clean, and in our edit we literally, make it worse, because at the end of the day, John Watson is our podcaster, and he's not a professional sound recordist. So, we add sort of clunks and clanks to the microphone, and we dirty up the audio so it sounds like you're really there. Adam went and recorded the sound of Baker Street. He walked up and down it like a weirdo 5 or 6 times in a row, holding a microphone up in the air. Jumped on all the local buses, went on the local tube. Then he obviously didn't go into 221B, but he recorded, what he wanted the living room to sound like, what he wants John's bedroom to sound like. So we, once we've got all those elements together, we piece it all together. And to be honest, we are independent, Adam and myself, and we've always kind of had that independent spirit of, we've made it, it's good to go, right, put it out there. Whereas for the last 2 years, we've been having, I would say that we listened, so our first episode is called Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I would say we listened to that episode in a meeting room with Goalhanger, their production team, probably 15 separate occasions. And there was constantly a feeling of, can we get to meet Sherlock sooner? Can this bit be quicker? Is that moment clear enough? Is that the right actor for that voice? And so the production is sort of like everything, like every kind of job or business. Once it's underway, it will be a well-oiled machine. But in the early days, making sure that the first adventure and the first episode was just the easiest possible listening experience, was just the top of everyone's list, essentially. We did start, this is a bit boring, but we did originally, our John was wounded in Afghanistan, and we were with Stamford for a good sort of like 13 minutes, and John was talking about all the things on his microphone, and his limp was really, really bad and all this kind of thing. But essentially, we wanted the listener to be hooked right away, and nothing hooks you more, unfortunately, more than a current event. So our John was in Ukraine as a sort of humanitarian volunteer in a sort of foreign legion. We rushed through the Stamford stuff. I love Stamford. I think he's great, but we needed to get to that moment of Sherlock and allow the listener to just be like, fine, we're here, thank God. And that's when I felt like people will really start to judge the show. So yeah, the production's been hugely important, but massively counterintuitive, because you're not trying to make it sound like this slick, polished thing. You're trying to make it sound as if John's cobbled this thing together, but behind the scenes to us, it is slick and polished, and it's all on purpose.
Hi, my name is Dr. Hey guys, I'm John. Bugger.
What on earth are you doing?
Shut up, just let me focus, yeah?
Yes, focus, of course. Quite the Herculean task, isn't it? Saying one's name.
Shh. Hi, my name is Dr. John Watson, and I'm here with my flatmate Sherlock Holmes, who is the subject matter for my podcast. What are you doing? Can you put the violin down, please? Just for a minute.
Watson, I really must be getting back to my work.
Just, please.
Your microphone is in the wrong mode.
Right. Do you know what? This is stupid. Yeah? I'll do the pre-titles myself. Okay? Get out. Out. Hi, I'm Dr. John Watson.
Yeah, well, it is kind of counterintuitive that way. But you know what? The genius of this production that really struck me as I was listening to it, and this is a minor thing, and one that only inveterate podcast listeners would understand. When you get to the end of an episode of Sherlock and Co, there are no credits. Usually you'll have a narrator read the credits that so-and-so is played by this, and, we had this person on audio production and sound design and all the rest. And there's none of that here. And I think what that does is it makes it even more realistic.
Yeah.
Just like Conan Doyle did in The Strand, where people were confused, ultimately, as to whether Sherlock Holmes was a real person or not, and would even write to him at Baker Street. And this is how the whole Sherlockian movement was born, kind of tongue-in-cheek, pretending that Conan Doyle was just the literary agent and Watson actually was the author.
Yeah.
And you've struck that exact same chord with this show.
We've had some amazing moments already. I mean, it's only been out 10 days. We've had somebody emailed probably on day 3, and they were asking Sherlock if he could come and help their friend Violet Hunter, who had to move to... Was it Violet Hunter? Violet Smith? Had to move to Nova Scotia to be the nanny for this guy. And they basically spelled out Copper Beeches in this big email, completely in character, to our John Watson, and if they could run it by Sherlock. Now, obviously, I wish we could quickly go and make that, and then it was out next week. But I love the idea that, when we do Copper Beeches, we can start it with an email that came from a genuine person who was, role-playing about, getting in touch with Sherlock. That was quite something. There was a few sort of remarkable things like that in the opening few days, actually.
Yeah, that's marvelous. Well, it is autumn, and the autumnal gales have blown in yet more works from Sherlockian authors at MX Publishing. New works include books like The Medical Casebook of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson by Nick Howlett, A Study in Statecraft by Orlando Pearson, and Sherlock Holmes, The Devil's Disciples by Richard T. Ryan. There are literally dozens upon dozens of books to choose from that were released in 2023 alone. And if you take a look at all of the new books that are coming, they are laid out by week, even in some case by the day, in the new arrivals at MX Publishing. Whether it's scholarship, pastiche, or other survey work, your need will be answered in the Sherlockian book world at mxpublishing.com. Make sure you check them out today and tell them IHOSE sent you. So, talk to us a little bit, Joel, about the collaborative process here. You alluded to it there recently with the production notes that you get from the Goalhanger team. But what about the creative process? When you think about bringing another story to life, are you in a room with other writers? Is it just you trying to work through this? How does the process work?
It's just me. It's just me. I might call Adam, give him a sort of early signal of like a theme. I'll say this is the adventure, give it a read. And I think our theme or, the style might be this sort of thing. So recently I wrote The Problem of Thorbridge, and it was another example of, I can't do it on these. It can't be a private bridge on these manor grounds over, 40 acres, this American billionaire. So I sort of said to Adam, a bit like what we did with Jackie the Ripper, let's make an episode that sounds like really, really authentic London voices in it. Something that feels very sort of multicultural is not really the word, but it sort of, if you've spent time in London, really feels like it is just popped out of the East End somewhere. So that's the kind of collaboration that will happen whilst I'm writing, is that I'm kind of giving early signals to the director about types of voices that we might need, or types of environments that we might be kind of talking about. But otherwise, it is just me. I do have sort of a golden rule to myself, working in audio, that I will ask myself, is this the most interesting environment for this scene? So I do kind of look at ways in which, we can get John and Sherlock out of the house, going to do something, because ultimately, when you do work in TV and film, you want the scenes to be simple and easy to manage, whereas we've sort of got an excuse to kind of go outside, go to lots of different interesting places. So that's the only kind of sort of collaboration I'm doing early on. The cast, Paul and Harry, are, they're geniuses. Paul is absolutely pitch perfect as Watson. We've been working for a long time. And like I say, I do write ums and ahs and hesitations and things in the script, and he nails them every single time. And then Harry Atwell will give, genuinely, he's getting silly now, 15 takes for every single line, even if that line's just one word. Even if it's the word no, he'll go, no, 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 no. And it's that kind of sort of, when you're sort of surrounded by perfectionists, and I'm the kind of the opposite. I'm a bit sort of I kind of like rush things, really. Well, when you're surrounded by those kinds of people that can really bring something to life, you just feel in such safe hands. And it's no mean feat doing a weekly show. You are putting tracks in front of a moving train, so having those people around who are just so safe in their hands is really important.
Who's the lead editor?
Adam Jarrell, the director, will do most of the editing, and then I will do some of it. So generally, the episode will sort of be sent back and forth, and kind of what I said earlier, sometimes it might come back to me and I'll say, this bit here is a bit too clean, I'm going to, dirty it up a little bit with John's mic. And a lot of the time, we're doing pickups quite a lot at the moment, I find, where we just sort of think, is that moment clear enough? I think so. Kitty Winter, for example, in the story, obviously, she sort of, I think she appears through the window, doesn't she, of Baron Gruner's house, and chucks a bit of vitriol in his face. Because it was such a visual thing, we did quite a lot of work getting Kitty Winter's lines and sort of her intentions with giving sort of nudge and wink to the listener that, she's planning something. And a lot of that was done through pickups. A lot of that, I'll sort of re-listen and I'd think, is that clear enough that she's got something in mind here? So, yeah, I mean, also the great thing about Adventures is our cast will always be, there's always this little rotation of new people coming through. I should say we haven't casted Lestrade yet, and we haven't casted Mycroft yet. Lestrade, I know he's in The Noble Bachelor in the original work. They won't be in ours, just because we're kind of saving off characters that feel special for the adventures that they're really prominent in, basically. And we're kind of keeping an eye out on what actors we could possibly grab for the role. I mean, we've been number 3 in the charts in the UK over here. We've had an amazing start, so it's not beyond the realms of possibility that might be a sort of well-known voice might come and lend their talents to the show. So that's quite exciting for us. And to be honest, sorry to waffle on, that's kind of a wider, I would say characters is one of the areas where we are drifting a little bit from the source material, in that, we are sort of saving them for certain places. And, Shinwell Johnson in The Illustrious Client, I ended up not using him because Sherlock gets really beaten up in the original story, and he's sort of out of action for like a week and a half. And I couldn't really afford to do that because I wanted to kind of have the adventure take place over a couple of days and feel like a really sort of whirlwind moment for John. So areas like that where we've just sort of maybe moved characters aside or we've pushed them into different adventures is probably where we are moving away from the work. Another way we've moved away from the work is we are going to kind of be frozen. All Sherlock fans love it when I say this. We are going to kind of be frozen in time. We are going to be with the boys in the flat. I'm not I just don't think it'll work for us personally if John's moved out and he's in Paddington or he's in his own practice and all that kind of thing. We are, in that sense, always going to be the lads under one roof. And then, of course, our Mrs. Hudson is Mariana, who works at Hudson's being a sort of property management company, and she's in charge of the 221 buildings on Baker Street. So, yeah, I think that basically covers my tracks for anyone that says, excuse me, you've drifted a long way from the originals.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, using Mariana as an agent from Hudson's is just brilliant. Just a wonderful modern versus the Una Stubbs, not your housekeeper, dear.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a tired trope. I think this is just a really believable and modern take on things.
Yeah, I mean, this might be, I don't know when you guys are airing this episode. Yeah, I'm not sure. But Sherlock and Co. will be the sort of name of the detective consultancy company that they make. And Mariana she's not going to be a property manager that serves all their wants and needs within their flat. She's going to sort of run the business for them. So, we really like her. She's played by Marta de Silva, and she's brilliant.
Yeah.
It sounds as if in your architecture of this and your forward planning that you are avoiding the thorny question that has occupied so many people in the Sherlockian world over decades, which is how many times was Watson married?
Yeah, I've avoided it heavily. I've given him a tattoo removal from a breakup. Now, if you get a tattoo of somebody, it's probably quite an intense relationship. And also, he's just been stood up by Mary. So she's talked of but not met. And I don't plan on meeting her anytime soon. So yeah, he is full-blown bachelor status here for me.
Yeah, smart move.
And I like the idea that you could use tattoo removal instead of wives.
Yeah.
You can count how many tattoos have been removed or not. That's good. So give us a sense of the timeline here, because already we've seen, as we're recording this, I think we're up to episode 3. And there have been 2 parts of The Illustrious Client released. I take it there's a third.
Yes.
These short stories are not self-contained in a single episode. So we're talking about multiple episodes per story and covering all 60 stories. This seems to be going on or might go on for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's the plan. It is quite ambitious. I feel a lot better now that it's had a good start. Bloody hell, it was a bit worrying. Yeah, so because we did the show that we did that we just finished in May, called The Offensive. That went for 5 years, and that was a weekly show. However, it was tied to the soccer season, so it was punctuated by a number of sort of long breaks, which was handy. Whereas this is always on. We don't have like a set rule of how long an adventure will last. So Illustrious Client will be 3 parts. Noble Bachelor is 2 parts. I think Thorbridge we've done as 2. And generally we'll kind of hover around 2 and 3 parts for the short stories. The thing that we're all sort of discussing right now is how you tackle the novels. Now, obviously, if you're trying to be... Baskervilles is actually quite straightforward, because Conan Doyle released that in installments in a magazine anyway, so there's plenty of cliffhangers that would fit into an episodic structure. But if you're trying to tackle a novel, you can't just go and do 14 parts, because at the end of the day, this is audio drama, and there's only so much that person can hold in their head, and there's only so many things you can fill into previously on Sherlock and Co. So right now our discussion is, what do we do with the novels, and just how much are they going to be condensed? Because if we did it, if our ratio was accurate, you're right, this would be a 3-year show, 3.5 years. Ultimately, I just don't believe that an audience would put up with 12, 13, 14 parts of the same adventure. I'm not sure. I could be wrong there.
Well, our audience would, but the general population probably not.
Yeah, your audience, I have faith. It's the other lot. They're the problem.
Well, there's always, the creative opportunity to, I mean, you're already producing this with actors in different parts of the world. It's not unusual in the true crime format for an investigation to have been conducted and completed, and then the team cuts it and assembles it into a story that could involve even other people. So, not that I'm suggesting this, but if somebody asked me how to do Study in Scarlet, you could, get a couple of Americans.
Maybe called
if
Scott
it was really a true crime, you could be, you could have Watson could actually be in the point of trying to sort through audio he's getting from somebody else in another part of the world. Yeah,
cool. I mean, it's completely, we've got so much more freedom than you'd expect, because obviously it's just audio. But once you dive into it, you just realise just how much you could do. But yeah, I mean, it's a long road ahead, but it's had an amazing start. People get it. I think people have jumped on board and go. It's funny. I do have imposter syndrome. I am sort of intellectually intimidated by the body of work, especially by someone like Arthur Conan Doyle. But I'm also aware of the balancing act that we've got to do in this. We're sort of balancing three audiences in a way, in that we've got the Sherlockians, who, so of course, some are hard to please. Of course, some are not hard to please at all. They just want Sherlock Holmes content in their lives. Sorry for saying content, it's a horrible word. And then we're kind of balancing, I suppose, what you'd call the John Locke community, which is the much, generally speaking, much younger audience who want, they want lots of things, but I mean, they want sort of diversity to be explored in all its forms. And they want something that sounds kind of flamboyant and different. They want, for obvious reasons, they want that relationship between the two men to be intimate in some respects, but really powerful and centre stage. And then the third audience that we're kind of balancing is the kind of, general mainstream public. And that's why it was so important. And that's why it took so many versions to get it to sound like something that they would have in their podcast diet. Because if it sounds clean and crisp and, receive pronunciation and all this kind of thing, they will turn off in an instant. And I know that because I'm one of them. There's so many shows that I've thought, I'd love to hear that. And then I'll put it in my ears and it's just something about it doesn't sort of chime with me. So we've got that constantly going on as well. And I think if I was a kid that was obsessed with Sherlock from the age of 5, and I was particular about its ins and outs, and I had an idea in my mind of exactly how Sherlock Holmes should be presented, I don't necessarily think I would be able to make a show like this. So I'll ride that wave of intellectual insecurity for now as well as I can, and hope that I deliver to all those three audiences that we love having on board for the ride.
So what do you think is going to be the most challenging story for you to adapt?
You always... because the thing is, I think it's naturally squeamish to look at stories about race and think, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. But I'm a bit, it will be fine. Well, there's ways of doing, whatever stories might be sort of culturally problematic now. The things that really, like, I sit at home scratching my chin and saying, how far can I take this? So Blue Carbuncle recently, I think, is a great story, but because we've already kind of lent into comedy, I don't want the goose thing to come across as sort of totally farcical on our account. Again, in the interest of sort of balancing those audiences, you can tap someone on the shoulder in the street and ask them, do they know what the Blue Carbuncle is? They will not know. And if I bring it to the world to the world. It's very grandiose. If I bring it to that audience and it's not pitched right, I worry that it might end up sort of looking like we're taking the piss, really. So it's kind of those ones, the ones that are sort of how do the Baskervilles is tricky, and the BBC Sherlock, I think I can see where they had problems with it as well, because they didn't want it to be this kind of supernatural, but this sort of ethereal beast, and because we're doing something, this is this hyper real true crime thing, we're backed into a corner where we have to present something that feels really real, but ultimately we have to stay faithful to the work. I'm not going to necessarily do what the BBC did, in that I think they suggested there was a hallucinogenic drug from a US lab, wasn't it, on Dartmoor or something?
I think that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The lab was called Hound, wasn't it? Because it was like an acronym.
That's right. That's right.
I want to do the original story.
Yeah.
But I'm just stupidly shouldn't never really overthink about the audience. I'm probably worrying about that mainstream audience that a bit being like, what? It was a feral big dog. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I think you're appropriately thoughtful and sensitive about it, and the audiences you list and you go through, and for what it's worth, I think at least from Scott and I think 10 out of 10. I think you've just produced something that really is spot on. But these are the creative sort of decisions that always go on. The blue carbuncle. Will I do something that's going to be the theft of a gem? Or perhaps the blue carbuncle should be an electric car. And,
yeah.
And then like you're really, you're off in space at this point if you do that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because sometimes the inhibitor will be the medium. Audio is for all its upsides, there are some downsides, and it's that people aren't always necessarily following that closely. Like I wrote The Adventure of the Cardboard Box recently. We got a kind of first draft recorded and edited and stuff. And it's 3 sisters, and it sounds so stupid. It's quite difficult to have total faith that your audience is keeping up. And it's a bit like the Garadebs will be the same problem, in that I'm being like, right, so not that sister, not Mary, but this sister Sarah, she was supposed to receive the ear, but it went to this sister because the other sister, and do you know what I mean? It's one of those things where if I had visuals to work with, or if it was a novel, for example, you can spell things, not in a sort of patronizing spelling things out kind of way, but you can spell things out with a few more tools. Whereas that's an area actually where we kind of struggled. I was going to say between us, just realised it was a podcast, between us lot, the Red-Headed League was supposed to be our first adventure. We cut it all together. It's had a few drafts, but there's a lot of characters in it. Basically, at the end of the day, that was its problem, and we felt as our first adventure, we wouldn't have the trust. We wouldn't have the trust of the listeners to really pay close attention. An illustrious client did not have that big wide array of characters that you needed to keep up with. So yeah, it's strange actually, the things that end up tripping you up or causing you to think and rethink and restructure. It's never what you'd expect going into it. Silver Blaze is another one that I've done a first draft on, and it's a lot of characters.
Do you miss the advantage of table reads? Because one of the things that and I'm sorry to be nattering on about these sort of geeky audio things, but it just seems to me to be such a barrier not to have actors reacting off of themselves. Now, on the other hand, you've got professional people who are doing these multiple takes who are really perfectionists, which is wonderful. But that just makes editing such a huge task. But I'm just curious about not having the advantage of a table read to sort of assemble the whole thing, because I find it extraordinary that after you've cut and produced it, you may, is sort of just the beginning of the process and not the end of the process.
Yeah, I mean, so what I will say is some stories we've cut together and gone, fantastic, fits like absolutely perfect. We're really happy with that. And then, like I say, some stories we just sort of think. Also, we have had the luxury of time. The last 2 years it's been in development, so we sort of have been able to sort of put them on ice for a little bit. Yeah, it would be great to have actors in the flesh. And I should say, actually, Adam Jarrell will go and direct key characters for adventures. Baron Gruner has to sound brilliant, and Kitty Winter has to sound brilliant. So they will be directed. They'll get a sound booth in London somewhere. But ultimately, our lead actor, lives in New Zealand, and that's the stumbling block ultimately. Now, fortunately, he does a very good job from where he is. But I think, in an ideal world, I agree with you. I don't think anything beats having actors there in the flesh. It would be great that we could do pickups and rewrites and tweaks right there in a couple of minutes, rather than, we've cut everything together and a couple of weeks later I send out an email saying, actually, this line should probably say this, and that scene needs to be a bit longer, and all this kind of thing. There's no substitute for being there in the moment with an actor, but we're close, we feel. It's just a little bit of hard work, to be honest.
As you're thinking across this timeline here, I've already asked you about what you think the most challenging story is going to be. Which story are you most excited to bring to the public?
Either Scandal in Bohemia, that's up there. I think, to be honest, once we get Red-Headed League right, I really love that story as well. But at the moment, my winner is Silver Blaze. I really like it. I really, really like it. I think from the early drafts that I've done, just being with the boys away on Dartmoor in an Airbnb is just, it's really fertile ground for not just comedy, but just the closeness of their relationship. And I think Silver Blaze is the winner.
It's a great story to work from.
Yeah,
no
I love it.
It's the classic. Clearly, between Holy Smokes Audio, yourself and Adam, and the Goalhanger team, they've got the right team in place for this project.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, Joel, thanks so much for being on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you for having me, guys. Pleasure.
We've done so much over the years about Sherlock Holmes and audio, from the early days of radio to the BBC series, but this is really something extraordinary. And in this whole conversation with Joel, what you get is the love and attention and the creativity and the talent and the passion that they've brought to this effort. And what really came through to me is just the laser focus on the text and on the drama and on the quality of it, word for word, line by line, this multinational, global group coming together to do this. It really is. It's a reinvention and an extension of the characters and a new link of the characters to modernity, and it's just really something special.
It really is, and I think how we're positioned to enjoy it is different from how people were positioned to enjoy the original stories as they came out in serial format in issue after issue of the Strand magazine. Because, well, let's face it, Sherlock Holmes, at least the full opus of the Sherlock Holmes canon, was not known then. With us, there's an anticipation because we know the beginning, the middle, and the end of each story and of the completeness of the canon itself. So we have something to look forward to. We kind of know against the palette against which they're being created. And yet, as you just said, there's this modernity about it that's done in such an authentic way that it's compelling. And for Joel and Adam to be able to create this and make it work, they're not only battling the forces of having to create something that's enjoyable for the modern audience, but as Joel kept telling us, he's battling the specter of Conan Doyle and this wonderful richness of content from which he had to choose. And blending the two, I think, is where the magic really happens.
The Sherlock Holmes Review is back, with articles on Sherlockian film and television, classic canonical scholarship, detective stories, illustrators, collecting, and more. In the latest annual, Curtis Armstrong tells how his love of Sherlock Holmes and acting first came together, how he starred in his first radio series, The Baker Street Theater, while he was still in high school, his encounter with Sherlock Holmes, Hugh Laurie, and Lin-Manuel Miranda, when he featured in the TV series House, how Sherlock Holmes crossed into his character in the WB series Supernatural, and his role as Inspector Gregson in the audible drama Moriarty, The Devil's Game. The Sherlock Holmes Review is back, combining great design with great writing, welcoming fans of every age and attitude. Get the latest issue, the 2022 annual, at wesexpress.com today.
All right, that's it. It's everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz show. That's right, it is Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry, and we ask you to discern which Sherlock Holmes story we're talking about. If you were around here last time, we gave you this clue. The fundamental tale wins hearty praise from all who overlook its Mormon phase. Now, Bert, this should be eminently easy for you, but I have faith in your ability. So lay it on me. Which story are we talking about here?
Oh, well, the Mormon thing is sort of a dead giveaway because everyone knows the traditional Mormon affection for pastry. This is the story where Count Negretto Silvius hides a stolen gem in an almond pastry. It's the case that Watson called the marzipan scone.
No. Oh, my gosh. Just when you think it's going to be a giveaway, you take that 90-degree left turn on me.
Oh.
Well done.
Wrong again.
Yeah. Well, if you recall, there was something odd that happened in the last episode. Eric Deckers, as he usually does, dialed in with his guess, and he guessed A Study in Scarlet last time when we were looking for the 5 orange pips. And he didn't know it then, but he had actually been a week early. As I look at the lineup of what we have planned here, I thought there was something that went wrong with the way I set up the columns here, but lo and behold, Eric writes in this time and says, "My apologies. I got the last canonical couplet wrong, but I figured out the problem. I had set the wrong date on my time machine and mistakenly sent you this week's answer for the previous episode's question. But my Mr. Fusion reactor is working again, and I've got the right answer. It's the story of the Mormon family that toured the world, entertaining people with their song and dance numbers before killing them. It's the story of the 5 orange pop stars." No, that's not right, Eric says. Besides, there were 7 of them. This is the story of A Study in Scarlet. Yes, Eric, you are right this time. It is A Study in Scarlet. And, I have to say, we were overwhelmed with entries this time. Lots of people wanted to win that book by Andrew Lysett, the Worlds of Sherlock Holmes. So we've got an extra large prize wheel to pull out this time around, so I'm going to have to put a little extra effort into this as I move it into the room here. And now we'll give it an extra large spin. Here we go. Okay, slowing down pretty much at the same pace. And it is number 57. 57, and that looks like Bruce McIntosh. Hey, all right, Bruce, congratulations. You are the lucky winner of this book from Andrew Lysett. I'll get that off to you. Well, now we're going to have a prize this time around, something from the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere vaults. We promise it'll be something enjoyable. You want to get yourselves ready, get a pen, get a piece of paper, and prepare yourself for this episode's clue. The secret rigmarole directly beckoned to legal assets of King Charles II. If you know the answer to this episode's canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you are among all of the correct answers and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. All right. Can't believe we've done it again.
Yay!
Well, normally we would be doing the Sherlockian news at this point, but we've gone so long we don't want to keep you. Remember, though, that if you would like to hear the rest of our conversation with Joel Emery, it continues for our Patreon supporters. Just go to patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock. There's a link to that in the show notes, and become a Patreon supporter. For as little as $1 a month, you too can enjoy the benefits of our community over there. Well, Bert, any big plans for Halloween?
Oh, yes, I'm going to be putting on my costume gee, I can't even think of what I could possibly put my Do you have any Halloween costumes that you wear regularly? I have a Star Trek officer's costume that I used to wear when my kids are young, and when Jean-Luc Picard was, it's from the Next Generation. I've got the collar pips and all that sort of stuff. I used to go out as an officer of the Enterprise, which I like quite a bit.
That's a good
one.
And
then occasionally, I remember one year I was Teddy Roosevelt with pince-nez. That was a lot of fun.
That's
and
good.
Another year I was, and there's, of course, always Sherlock Holmes you could do, but there's only so much Sherlocking you can do from year after year.
Not everybody recognizes that. I prefer to go a little more mainstream. So this year I'm going as a podcaster. And before kids will take candy, I make them sit through 3 minutes of ads. So it's either
the show
that
notes.
I make them listen to our show notes or our homework stuff. It's either that or I'm going as an NPR fund drive.
Why don't you go as a tote bag?
Yeah. Well, the sky's the limit here. But we do have a Halloween episode. I think episode 47, we talked about some ghoulish things. So if you're interested in going back and listening to some of our back catalog from a long time ago, episode 47 will get you there. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Oh, good.
Yes. Well, until we meet again in these parts, I remain the ever ghoulish Scott Monty.
And I am just the universal horror Burt Wolder.
And together, we say, the game's afoot.
Afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.